Um, we will now we'll now go on to the panel discussion, featuring sorry, not the panel discussion. We're going to go on to feature some of our disability advocates, to have a discussion on promoting inclusion and representation in literature. Chloe and Laura. So first, I will just ask Chloe and Laura to introduce themselves. Um, so if you guys could just your names, where you're calling in from, visual description, pronouns. Um, yeah. So we'll start with Chloe.
Hi everyone, I'm Chloe. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm dialing in from Wajak Noongar country. By way of visual description, I am in my late 20s. I have light brown skin, dark brown hair, and dark brown eyes. My hair is wavy with a fringe about shoulder length. And I'm wearing glasses. I've got some nose piercings, and I'm wearing a white t-shirt with a dark green knitted vest. And I'm sitting in my study with a window next to me and my desk with some books and a plant behind me.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And then Laura, if we could just get you to introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tiana. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura. My pronouns are she and her. I'm joining today from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country. And visual description of me is that I am an Italian woman in my late 30s, late 20s. And I am wearing pink glasses. My hair is tied up behind me. I'm also wearing watermelon earrings that I'm obsessed with. They're really dangly. And I'm also wearing a grey jumper from Clothing the Gap. And yeah, I am a disabled writer and bibliophile, which means I just love books, and I'm so excited to be here. Thanks.
Thank you guys so much, and thank you for the very detailed visual descriptions. I really appreciate it. We're thrilled to have you guys both here today. So we're just going to dive into the discussion. So my first question is for you, Chloe. And I'd like to ask you why you think it's important to have diverse and accurate representation of disability in TV or books, or things that children and young people engage with. How does this contribute to the broader goals of inclusion and diversity?
That is a great question. And I also realized I sort of didn't really introduce who I am. I just introduced where I'm coming from. But I am a PhD student, and I'm researching disability and queer representation in children's animated television. So I'm also a bibliophile. I love reading, love books, and I think everyone deserves to be represented. So that's why I'm here. As for the question, so why it's important to have that representation, I think there's sort of two sides to this question. So there are benefits for people or children with disability, and also benefits for people without disability. So for people with disability, representation of diverse identities like disability in media, whether that's books or TV or whatever, can really shape our self-image and the way we see ourselves and feel about ourselves. So for us, seeing characters who also have a disability can either be really helpful or it can hinder us depending on how the representation is. So this means that if the only representations of disability that are presented to us are negative or they reinforce those stereotypes, we might be more likely to internalize that and feel that way about ourselves. But the good news is that the opposite is also true. So having diverse and genuine representation of disability can help us feel more confident and have pride in who we are and have pride in our disability. And then as for people who don't have a disability, basically media in general kind of allows us to meet people outside of our usual social circles. So if you are someone who doesn't have a disability and you don't think you really know anyone with a disability, engaging with media that does feature disability in a complex and genuine way can really help open up people's worldviews, and children especially, who are kind of exposed to different sorts of people, whether in real life or through media, are likely to carry those positive attitudes into adulthood as well. So overall, it helps contribute to a more inclusive world in general. And I also think that everyone benefits from diversity in stories. I think it creates better stories. I think it's more interesting to engage with all those different fresh perspectives rather than hearing or seeing the same stories over and over again.
I completely agree. Thank you so much. Laura, this is another big question, but it also allows you to comment on the importance of representation and the question is, how can writers, publishers, and educators collaborate to improve the representation of disabled characters in books? What support systems need to be in place for disabled writers?
Laura speaking. Love this question. Before I jump into it, I'm going to do what Chloe did and just do a quick hi. I am a disability advocate and writer. I review books regularly. Specifically, I try to focus on books with disability representation. And yeah, I think this event is super duper important, and I'm so privileged to be part of it because I often say that I believe that books can change the world. And it's not just that I believe that, it's that I know that, because they've changed mine and they continue to change mine every day. When I was growing up as a disabled young person with cerebral palsy and psychosocial disability, otherwise known as mental illness, I never really, much like everyone else who's spoken, saw characters who were like me. I only found disability pride, the notion of embracing my disability in my 20s. And I've often thought about how different it might have been, how much earlier I might have been able to find that pride and that community if I'd seen characters who were like me in the pages of the books that I'd absolutely devoured. And there are still so many days now, because the world is ableist, that it can be really tricky. And on those days, it's books that I turn to for solace. It's books that I turn to galvanize me. And I think those books galvanize me, and I know they galvanize, and I believe that they can galvanize and bring comfort and solace to so many other people. So quick preamble there, but in answer to your question around what writers, publishers, and educators can do to collaborate in terms of increasing disability representation, that is a really big question, and I'm going to kind of break it down one by one. I think the really big collaboration there is between writers and publishers. And Eliza gave us a really good glimpse into that when she was talking about her books. And I think there are a couple of things that I want to highlight. One, publishers can make sure that their process for accepting submissions and then acquiring submissions and working with authors is as accessible as possible, to make sure that disabled writers have the best possible shot and the most accessible and inclusive environment for them to be able to tell their stories. And that starts from the very beginning. It starts from having a website that is accessible, that meets web content accessibility guidelines. It starts with having multiple methods of communication or contact options on their website, not just an email address, not just a phone number. It starts with thinking about the ways that the authors that publishers are engaging with choose to communicate and how to meet their access needs in the best possible way, which could be things like, hybrid meetings or online meetings during the ongoing pandemic. But it also means publishers and writers thinking about, once they've written a story, once they've accepted a story for publication, what kind of language are you using around disability? Not just, the ways that you're portraying disabled characters, as everyone has so eloquently outlined earlier, but also the use of ableist slurs in publication, because there are so many, even in children's books, like the titles of a children's book that I saw on my Instagram feed recently had an ableist slur in the title And I just went, oh my goodness, how did that get through? Like the author, the copy editor, like the structural editor, every single person that had to approve that book. And no one stopped and thought, hang on a second. This like title and these words are perpetuating really damaging ideas. So I think every single person involved in the publishing process in that way has a role in calling out that ableism, in saying, hey, hang on a second. I think we can do better with our language. Can we choose a different word there? And that can be hard. I get it, like speaking out and speaking up, particularly when a lot of people don't necessarily understand that the origins of very many ableist slurs that have been normalized are quite damaging and ableist. But if you do speak up, the world will be better for it. So that's the collaboration between writers and publishers. And I'm aware that I'm going on and on, but this is just like my favorite topic ever. So people cut me off and compassionately interrupt me if you need to. But educators are one of the first ports of call for young students. And they were one of the first ways that I was personally introduced to books and to positive representation. And so what I think is really important for educators to do is to talk to students about disability. Don't just kind of like hide it away. Don't just kind of brush it aside, because all that does is, again, perpetuate that notion that disabled people are othered, that we're alienated, but we're not. And educators have the power through the books that they choose to read to young people, through the like authors that they choose to maybe have to come in and do author talks. All of those things educators can do to challenge the norms and the assumptions that many people might hold around disability. And educators and publishers can collaborate through the books that come into school libraries. And I'm very conscious of time now, so I'm going to hand back to you, Tiana, but I'm happy to send through my thoughts via email and Sue can pass them on later.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your answer and for your detailed response and going into it, because I think it's so important. My next question is for Chloe, and I just would like to know if you could please share the key findings from your research on the portrayal of disability in children's animated TV. How do these findings relate to the representation of disability in chapter books? In your experience, what impact does accurate and diverse representation of disabled characters have on young readers with disabilities?
Chloe speaking. Yeah, sure. So my PhD project is focused on exploring stories about disability or stories about queerness in children's animated television. I am pretty early into my PhD, so I recently passed my milestone 1, which essentially means I haven't necessarily conducted any of my own research yet. It's all been kind of that background research. So I will keep you posted on what I find out. But in terms of the media landscape in general, so I think it's been really interesting actually to think about the similarities and differences between how the LGBT plus community and the disability community have been historically represented, whether that's in books or TV and film. For film especially, for a long time, LGBT plus characters weren't even allowed to be shown in major Hollywood films because of the rules around what could and couldn't be shown on TV or in movies. So for that community, it's really kind of the issue of quantity, but also quality. Whereas for disability has always been represented in stories. So it's not necessarily quantity that's the issue, it's more the quality. So if you think about stories that kind of most people will know about, so Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, characters like Tiny Tim in A Christmas Carol, or as Eliza mentioned, Captain Hook in Peter Pan. All of these are really like quite old and quite iconic stories, and they all feature disabled characters. So it's not the quantity there that's the problem, it's kind of how they're represented. So in all those stories, disability is usually used as a metaphor for something else, or disability is seen as something that's really negative, or that person's presented as someone to pity, or they're a burden to their family or whatever. Or in Captain Hook's case, it's his whole like driving force around seeking revenge, basically. So overall, pretty negative. So as I mentioned, I'm looking at television specifically, so I had to do a little bit of research about what it's like in the book world. Most research seems to be about picture books rather than children's chapter books. So there is a gap there if anyone wants to go and do some research into that topic. But I did find a little bit about chapter books, and overall the research shows that it is thankfully improving in terms of having more positive and diverse representation of disability. There are still some trends of kind of those like quote unquote well-meaning but problematic representations of disability. And that's not to say these stories are bad or you shouldn't read them or the stories are terrible or anything like that. I think it's more about using them as an opportunity to think to yourself or to ask the person you're reading to, how's disability represented here and how do we feel about it? And it can be used as an opportunity to sort of open up that discussion. So yeah, overall, I think it's not just any representation that we're after. It's not just the quantity, it's the quality. Like I want to see complex and genuine representation of all kinds of disabilities and all kinds of people with disabilities. Our lives aren't negative and terrible all the time, but they're also not like positive and amazing all the time. So I want to see characters who are heroes and villains and love interests and who have all the personality traits just like we do in real life, basically. And I think with that complex representation is when everyone, whether they do or don't have a disability, will be able to broaden their understanding about what disability can be like.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chloe. Laura, back to you. We know you've done extensive work in making literature more accessible through plain language and easy read content. Could you explain why it is particularly important to have accurate and diverse representation of characters with disabilities in books that are designed to be accessible?
Laura speaking. Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, just for people who might not be aware, plain language is a way of writing that uses short sentences and avoids jargon in order to convey or share information in a way that's really clear and easy to understand. An easy read is a little bit different. So it's intended for people who might have lower literacy for whatever reason. And it uses pictures and really short sentences, and it also explains hard words or words that might be less common for readers to use the pictures and the words together to understand what's being said. And plain language and easy read are two of my absolute favorite things. In addition to reading lots of books and talking about books and disability representation and drinking lots of tea, I also have the immense privilege of working at CYDA as Inclusion Support Officer. And I get to write lots of easy read and plain language content at CYDA. So I'm just so happy that I get to talk about that. But jumping back to the question specifically, I think it's really important first to highlight that we know that disabled people comprise at least 18% of our population. And I say at least because we know that that number is either increasing or going to continue to increase as more people feel comfortable to disclose their disabilities, but also as people unfortunately develop long COVID or post-viral illnesses as a consequence of the ongoing pandemic. So given the fact that we constitute approximately 1/5 of the population, it's really important for us to see ourselves in an equivalent amount of literature, both children's and otherwise. And it's equally important for that literature, but all literature, to be disseminated in formats that are as accessible as possible. And those formats might be large print, which Vision Australia Library has a really large collection, no pun intended, of large print titles. But it's also audiobooks and ebooks, and I'm not going to talk too long about the importance of audiobooks because I'm sure Tiana will be able to talk a lot more eloquently about that and from lived experience than I can. But all of those formats are really important because that they mean that our stories, every single story, can reach the widest possible audience and can in that way change the biggest amount of lives and change the world. So thanks, Tiana. Pass back to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Another question for Chloe before we wrap up this discussion. What are some immediate actions that our audience can take to support greater representation of disability in literature and support disabled writers? How can they get involved in advocacy efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are so many different ways you could do this, and I think a lot of them have been touched on today already. I would say to share this webinar with your friends and family after the session. Or if you don't want to share the whole thing with them, talk about what you learned today or what you wish you could see when it comes to representation. You can use what you've learned to advocate at your school or your local library for more books about disabled characters or by disabled authors, or books in different formats so that they're more accessible. You could also, I love a book club. So I love reading books and having other people read books, and then we talk about the book. So I think that's a really good opportunity to kind of open up those discussions about disability representation and kind of take it that step further. And I think what Lily touched on earlier is really important around how like publishers might not think disability or disabled characters is something that people want to read about, but it absolutely is. Like, as Laura said, we make up at least like 18-20% of the population. That's a massive part of the market. That's a massive group of people who are wanting stories about them. So yeah, write your own stories, write to publishers and authors saying that this is what you want to see, this is what you want to read about. Yeah, make sure that you're giving your feedback to publishers, authors, libraries, schools about how important it is to have disabled characters and disabled stories.